Welcome to The Deep Read, the show that takes those fascinating books and, breaks them down.
That's right.
So you don't have to. I'm Mike.
And I'm Emily.
And we are diving deep today into Didion and Babitz by Lili Anolik.
Yes.
This book is about two LA icons, their intertwined lives, and why their legacies are surprisingly relevant right now.
Absolutely.
So this book really explores, Joan Didion,
Yeah.
the celebrated novelist,
Yeah.
and Eve Babitz.
More under the radar.
Yeah.
But equally brilliant.
Absolutely.
And their lives and careers intertwined in really interesting ways,
Yeah.
making this a really captivating read.
And you say under the radar,
Right.
but this is someone who posed nude with Marcel Duchamp in front of one of his most famous works.
Right.
So she knew how to make a statement.
She did.
What do you make of that particular incident given her artistic ambitions?
It's a powerful image, right? I mean, not just a nude woman,
Yeah.
but a statement, I think, of artistic defiance.
Right.
She felt Walter Hopps was ignoring her, who was a really influential art dealer. And this was her way of grabbing his attention on her own terms. And it speaks volumes, I think, about Eve's personality.
Yeah.
Bold, rebellious, and just determined to be noticed.
Yeah. And noticed she was.
Yes.
But beyond these headline-grabbing moments, she did have a significant impact on the LA art scene.
Absolutely.
I mean, designing album covers for Buffalo Springfield and the Byrds.
Wow, yeah.
That's not just being in the right place at the right time.
No.
That's talent and vision.
Totally. And what's often overlooked is that Eve was a serious artist in her own right.
Yeah.
Her collage work, deeply embedded in the energy of the 60s and 70s LA music scene, was a direct reflection of her life.
Oh, wow.
Vibrant, playful, and rule-breaking.
Yeah.
It wasn't about just being a groupie.
Right.
She was creating art that captured the essence of that era.
It seems like she was constantly challenging expectations.
Yes.
Especially those placed on women in that era.
Absolutely.
And her upbringing must have played a role. I mean, imagine growing up with Stravinsky and Schoenberg as regular guests in your home.
I know, right?
That's not your average childhood.
Not at all.
How did that impact her?
Well, her parents were deeply involved in the LA Philharmonic scene, exposing her to a world of high culture from a young age.
Yeah.
But LA's freewheeling, rebellious spirit also permeated her upbringing.
Right.
And that unique blend comes through in her writing.
Yeah.
It's insightful, funny, and brutally honest,
Uh-huh.
whether she's discussing love affairs or her struggles with addiction.
And that honesty is so refreshing.
Yes.
Especially when she talks about these difficult experiences, like the fire accident that left her with severe burns.
Oh, yeah.
She doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of her life,
No.
but it never feels like she's seeking pity.
Right. It's more like a refusal to present a sanitized version of herself.
Right.
She owned her experiences,
Yeah.
both the triumphs and the tragedies, and that rawness makes her work all the more compelling.
Yeah.
But this brings up a fascinating contradiction.
Yes.
Eve craved recognition,
Right.
yet she constantly rebelled against conformity.
Yeah. How do you reconcile that?
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's almost like she wanted to redefine fame on her own terms.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's turn to the other half of the equation.
Okay.
Joan Didion.
Yes.
She's often portrayed as this cool, detached observer,
Right?
chronicling California's chaos with an almost unsettling calmness.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an accurate portrayal, or is there more to the story?
Well, Anolik delves into the complexities beneath that carefully constructed persona.
Okay.
Joan's public image of cool composure often masked a deep well of emotion and vulnerability.
Interesting.
Her marriage to John Donne, for example, was famously turbulent.
Yeah.
And the impact of the Manson murders
Right.
and her niece's tragic death shook her to her core.
Wow.
And these experiences seeped into her writing, adding layers of grief and unease beneath those surface observations.
So we have these two seemingly disparate figures.
Yes.
One embracing the chaos, the other dissecting it.
Yeah.
But their paths crossed in the LA scene, didn't they?
They did.
Tell me about those intersections and how they impacted their relationship.
Well, there's shared experiences, particularly within Earl McGrath's circle, and the broader Franklin Avenue scene really highlight their contrasting personalities and approaches to life.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine Joan Didion, the queen of literary cool rolling shoulders, with Janis Joplin and Tom Wolfe at a party
Wow.
hosted by a Hollywood art dealer.
It's a fascinating glimpse into a specific time and place.
Yeah.
A melting pot of creative energy and social rebellion.
It was.
What role did this scene play in shaping both Joan and Eve's work?
Think of it as a cultural petri dish where their ideas and observations fermented.
Okay.
Joan, the astute observer, saw this scene as a reflection of a society teetering on the edge, capturing it with her trademark precision and detachment.
Yeah.
Eve, on the other hand, fully immersed herself in the energy and freedom of it all, weaving those experiences into her writing with wit and a touch of nostalgia.
But there's an interesting dynamic at play here, isn't there?
Definitely.
Eve openly admired Joan,
Yes.
but also seemed to harbor a sense of rivalry, almost a resentment.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
It's the classic frenemy dynamic, isn't it?
Right.
Eve clearly saw Joan as both a role model and a competitor.
Interesting.
She admired Joan's success,
Yeah.
but also felt the need to differentiate herself to forge her own path.
Right.
And it makes you wonder how much of Eve's rebellious streak was fueled by a desire to stand out from Joan's shadow.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about personal ambition.
No.
Both women were navigating the challenges of being female artists in a male-dominated world.
Absolutely.
How did their experiences reflect those broader societal pressures and expectations?
Well, both faced hurdles and biases,
Yeah.
but their responses differed. Joan, with her carefully cultivated persona and sharp intellect, commanded respect in a way that defied traditional expectations.
Okay.
Eve, on the other hand, used her wit and rebelliousness, even her sexuality,
Yeah.
to subvert those expectations, carving out space for her unique voice.
That's such a crucial point.
It is.
They were both successful, but on their own terms,
Exactly.
paving the way for future generations of women in the arts.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see how their individual choices reflected the evolving landscape for female artists.
Absolutely. And it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
Anolik's book goes far beyond surface-level comparisons.
Yeah.
Peeling back the layers of these complex lives, their contrasting approaches to pain and success, their differing perceptions of LA, and ultimately their enduring impact on literature and culture.
And that impact is something we'll continue to explore.
Yes.
But before we move on, what stood out to you most in this initial exploration of their lives and work?
Oh, it's a good question.
What resonated with you and what questions are you left with? I'm curious.
Well, I think we were just talking about how both Joan and Eve navigated this male-dominated literary scene.
Right.
And it's striking how their individual choices really reflect these broader societal shifts happening at the time.
It's interesting how their contrasting personalities led them to such different approaches.
Yeah.
Joan seemed to cultivate this aura of intellectual authority, almost transcending traditional gender roles.
Yeah.
But Eve,
Uh-huh.
she seemed to weaponize her femininity,
Okay.
using her wit and charm to kind of challenge expectations.
It's as if they were working from opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Joan sought to dismantle the system from within,
Right.
while Eve was more about disrupting it, poking holes in its facade.
And both approaches were effective in their own way,
Absolutely.
paving the way for a more nuanced understanding of what it means to be a successful female artist.
Yeah, and there's a story in the book that really exemplifies this.
Okay.
Anolik recounts a time when Joan and Eve attended a Doors recording session together.
Oh, wow.
Orchestrated by Eve, of course.
Of course.
And Joan, the quintessential observer, was there to witness this countercultural phenomenon.
I can't imagine Joan Didion, with her crisp prose and meticulous observations, being particularly drawn to the raw energy of Jim Morrison and the Doors.
Right.
It seems so out of character.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of Anolik's book.
Right.
She reveals these unexpected intersections
Yeah.
that force us to reconsider our preconceived notions about these women.
It's interesting.
And in her essay, Waiting for the End, Joan does mention attending a Doors recording session,
Oh, wow.
describing the scene with her trademark detachment.
Uh-huh.
But there's a hint of fascination there,
Yeah.
an acknowledgement of Morrison's undeniable power.
It's almost as if she recognized him as a symbol of the era, embodying both the allure and the darkness of that time.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, did she see any parallels between Morrison's self-destructive tendencies and the broader societal anxieties she was dissecting in her work?
That's a really fascinating question.
Yeah.
And it speaks to a larger point about their writing. Both Joan and Eve captured the essence of LA in their own unique ways.
Right.
Eve, immersed in the scene,
Yeah.
brought an immediacy and rawness to her portrayals, while Joan's more detached observations offered this chillingly accurate diagnosis of the era's anxieties and contradictions.
It's like they were holding up two different mirrors to the city,
Yes.
reflecting back its beauty and ugliness,
Yeah.
its glamour and its
Yeah.
grit.
Exact.
And that multifaceted perspective is what makes their work so enduring.
Speaking of enduring legacies,
Yeah,
their influence extends far beyond the LA literary scene.
right.
Both Joan and Eve have inspired generations of writers, particularly women,
Yeah.
to explore themes of identity, place, and the female experience in bold and unconventional ways.
Eve, with her wit and honesty,
Yeah.
her refusal to conform to expectations, paved the way for a new generation of female voices, unafraid to embrace their complexities, their humor, their sexuality.
Right.
She showed that you didn't have to choose between being brilliant and being desirable,
Yeah.
that you could be both.
And Joan, with her sharp observations
Mm-hmm.
and unflinching examination of societal anxieties, gave voice to a collective unease
Right,
that still resonates today.
definitely.
Her exploration of the fragility of the American dream,
Yeah.
the dark undercurrents beneath the surface of success, feels eerily prescient in our current times.
It's almost as if they were warning us in their own distinct ways about the dangers of complacency,
Yeah.
the need to stay alert,
Right.
to question the narratives we're told.
Absolutely.
And that's a lesson that transcends any specific era or location.
Their work reminds us of the power of observation,
Right.
the importance of critical thinking,
Yeah.
the need to engage with the world around us with both curiosity and skepticism.
And let's not forget the style.
Oh, yeah.
Both Joan and Eve were incredibly stylish women, and that extended to their writing as well.
Absolutely.
Joan's prose was minimalist, elegant, almost surgical in its precision.
Yes.
Eve's writing, on the other hand, was playful, exuberant, full of life and energy.
They proved that intelligence and style weren't mutually exclusive.
Right.
That you could be both insightful and rebellious, both brilliant and beautiful.
Yeah.
And that message continues to resonate with readers, especially young women who are trying to find their own voices, their own paths in the world.
Their lives and work offer this powerful message.
Yeah.
Be yourself. Embrace your complexities. Challenge the status quo.
And don't forget the humor.
Oh, right.
Both Joan and Eve were masters of satire and irony,
Yeah.
able to skewer hypocrisy and expose absurdity with a sharp wit and a knowing wink.
That ability to find humor in the darkness,
Right.
to laugh at the absurdity of it all, is so important.
It is.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of chaos,
Yeah.
even when the world feels like it's falling apart,
Right.
there's still room for joy,
Absolutely.
for playfulness, for a sense of perspective.
It's a coping mechanism.
Right.
A way of acknowledging the darkness without letting it consume you.
But now I want to circle back to Eve's complicated relationship with Joan.
Okay.
This frenemy dynamic is such a fascinating thread throughout the book.
It is.
What do you think their relationship would be like if they were both still alive today?
It's tempting to imagine them meeting for coffee,
Right.
sharing stories, maybe even collaborating on a project.
Yeah.
But their dynamic was always fraught with tension,
Yeah.
a mix of admiration and resentment.
Eve clearly idolized Joan,
Mm-hmm.
seeing her as this literary giant, a role model,
Right.
but she also felt overshadowed by her,
Uh-huh.
frustrated by the fact that Joan seemed to effortlessly achieve the recognition and success that she craved.
And that frustration sometimes manifested as criticism.
All right.
Remember that scathing letter Eve wrote in response to Joan's essay on the women's movement?
Yes.
She accused Joan of being out of touch,
Oh, wow.
of not truly understanding the struggles of ordinary women.
It was a bold move.
It was...
And it speaks to Eve's willingness to challenge, even though she admired.
Yeah.
She wasn't content to be a follower.
Right.
She wanted to carve her own path, even if it meant ruffling some feathers.
But despite the tension, there was also this deep respect between them.
Right.
A recognition of each other's talent.
Yeah.
Perhaps over time, that respect could have evolved into a genuine friendship.
It's a tantalizing thought.
It is.
But ultimately, we're left with the work they produced,
Yeah.
both individually and collectively. And that work offers this unique window into the heart and soul of Los Angeles, a city that continues to fascinate and confound.
Now, before we delve into some of the more specific details that make this book such a captivating read,
Right.
I want to hear from you.
Yeah.
What resonates with you most about Joan and Eve's stories?
Right.
What surprises you?
Yeah.
What questions are you left with? So we've been talking about these broader themes and the impact of Joan Didion and Eve Babitz's work. But there are so many fascinating details in this book
There are.
that really bring their personalities and experiences to life.
It's those specific anecdotes, those almost gossipy moments
Right.
that make them feel so real and relatable,
Yeah.
even when their lives seem so extraordinary.
For instance, Eve's story about her affair with Ahmet Erdogan, the founder of Atlantic Records.
Wow.
It's more than just a juicy tidbit.
Right.
It reveals a lot about her navigation of power dynamics,
Yeah.
especially within that male-dominated music
It
industry.
would have been easy to just dismiss her as another starlet chasing fame,
Right.
but she was clearly drawn to Erdogan's power and influence.
Mm-hmm.
Yet she also writes about the relationship with a sense of self-awareness,
Yeah.
acknowledging her own youth,
Yeah.
and perhaps a bit of naivete.
It speaks to a pattern in Eve's life.
Yeah.
She was attracted to powerful men,
Right.
but never wanted to be controlled by them.
Hmm.
She maintained her independence, her own sense of agency, even while navigating those complex relationships.
It challenges this simplistic narrative
Yeah.
that's often attached to women who are involved with powerful men.
Right.
Eve was clearly intelligent and ambitious, using those relationships to further her own goals
Mm-hmm.
while refusing to be defined by them.
Exactly. And it's a theme that emerges in other aspects of her life as well, like her
Exactly.
friendship with Paul Rusha.
Right.
Their relationship was a true creative partnership, each encouraging and supporting the other's artistic ambitions.
I think it's important to acknowledge that Eve was a talented artist in her own right.
Absolutely.
Beyond the more sensational aspects of her life,
Yes.
her writing, her collage work,
Yeah.
it all pointed to a sharp mind and a unique artistic vision.
Totally. And while we're talking about specific details,
Yeah.
we can't forget about Joan Didion.
Right.
Anolik doesn't shy away from revealing some of the more personal struggles Joan faced,
Yeah.
particularly her anxiety surrounding fame and her complicated marriage.
I was struck by the anecdote about Joan's nervous breakdown in the late 60s, right at the peak of her success.
Oh, yeah.
It humanizes this image of her as this effortlessly cool and composed literary figure.
It does, right.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even those who seem to have it all figured out
Right.
are often grappling with their own internal struggles.
And it's interesting that both Joan and Eve experienced periods of intense anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and what Eve called squalid overboogie around the same time.
I know, it's fascinating.
It speaks to the pressures they faced, not just as women in a male-dominated field,
Right.
but as artists navigating the often turbulent waters of fame and public scrutiny.
Their experiences remind us that success doesn't erase vulnerability.
Yeah.
In fact, it can sometimes amplify those anxieties and insecurities.
And it's something that I think a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
particularly creatives, can relate to.
For sure.
It's a powerful reminder that we often only see the carefully curated facades people present to the world. But beneath the surface, everyone is grappling with something.
Exactly. And that brings us to a final, almost haunting detail from the book.
Okay.
Anolik recounts her last meeting with Eve Babitz, where Eve thanks her in this cryptic, almost unsettling way. She simply says, "I guess I ought to thank you," and leaves it at that.
It's such a chilling ending.
Yeah.
What do you make of that final interaction?
It's hard to say. Was it a genuine expression of gratitude?
Right.
Or was there something more layered, more knowing beneath those words?
It's impossible to say, for sure.
Yeah,
And I think that's part of what makes Eve Babitz such an enduringly fascinating figure.
absolutely.
Even in her final days, she retained that enigmatic quality, that ability to leave you guessing, wondering what lay beneath the surface.
It speaks to the power of this book.
Yeah.
It doesn't offer easy answers or neat conclusions.
Right.
It's an exploration of two complex lives.
Yeah.
Two brilliant minds, two women who defied categorization.
And ultimately, I think that's the most important takeaway.
I agree.
Both Joan and Eve challenged us to think critically, to question assumptions, to embrace complexity. They remind us that there's no single narrative that can encompass a life, a career, or an entire cultural movement.
Their legacy lies in their willingness to push boundaries, to disrupt expectations, to embrace their own unique voices.
And they inspire us to do the same.
Absolutely.
So as we conclude our deep dive into Didion and Babitz, what are you left pondering?
That's a good question.
What new perspectives have you gained? And what questions linger in your mind? We encourage you to share your thoughts, your insights, and your favorite Didion and Babitz moments in the comments.
Yes.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe to The Deep Read for more fascinating journeys into the world of books.
Definitely.
Until next time, keep reading, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going.
All right.